Marcus Johnson adjusted his tie one more time as he walked through the doors of the downtown community center. At 62, the retired Army Master Sergeant still carried himself with military bearing, his back straight and shoulders squared. His gray hair was cut in a precise fade, and his dark suit was pressed to perfection. Tonight was important. The monthly veteran support meeting he helped organize had grown from 5 members to over 40 in just 2 years. Walking beside him was his longtime friend David Washington, a former Navy Chief Petty Officer who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. David was younger at 55, but the lines around his eyes told stories of sleepless nights overseas and the challenges of readjusting to civilian life. Both men had found purpose in helping other veterans navigate the complex world of benefits, job placement, and mental health support. The community center buzzed with activity as veterans and their families filtered in for the evening meeting. Marcus had reserved the main hall, and folding chairs were arranged in a large circle. Tonight's agenda included a presentation from a VA about new housing assistance programs and a discussion about organizing a job fair specifically for veterans. Good turnout tonight, David observed, scanning the growing crowd. He recognized faces from previous meetings mixed with several newcomers who looked nervous and uncertain. Both men remembered their first meetings after leaving the service, how difficult it had been to admit they needed help and community. Marcus nodded, greeting arriving members with firm handshakes and warm smiles. "Mrs. Rodriguez, how's your son doing with his applications?" he asked a middle-aged woman whose son had recently returned from deployment with PTSD. "Better, thanks to the resources you connected him with," she replied gratefully. "The counselor you recommended has made a real difference." These moments reminded Marcus why this work mattered. After 25 years in the Army, including deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, he had struggled with his own transition to civilian life. The structured purpose of military service was replaced by a confusing maze of job applications, benefit claims, and a society that seemed to view veterans with a mixture of pity and suspicion. David moved through the crowd with equal ease, his naturally outgoing personality helping newcomers feel welcome. As a former Navy electronics specialist, he had a knack for explaining complex bureaucratic processes in simple terms. His expertise had helped dozens of veterans successfully navigate disability claims and educational benefits. "Gentlemen, we should probably get started," called out Sarah Mitchell, a social worker who volunteered her time to help with the meetings. She had been working with veteran populations for over a decade and had seen firsthand how peer support could transform lives. Marcus called the group to order, his commanding voice easily filling the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome our new members. Remember, what's shared here stays here, and everyone's experience is valid and respected." The meeting proceeded smoothly. Veterans shared updates on job searches, family situations, and ongoing challenges. A young woman spoke about her difficulty finding employers who understood her military experience. An older veteran discussed his ongoing fight with the VA over a disability rating. Each story was met with nods of understanding and offers of practical help. During the break, Marcus and David stepped outside for some fresh air. The community center was located in a diverse neighborhood that had seen significant changes over the past decade. New businesses were opening, property values were rising, and longtime residents sometimes felt displaced by the changes. "You know what I love about these meetings?" David said, leaning against the building wall. "It doesn't matter what branch we served in, what our rank was, or what we did before the military. We're all just trying to figure out how to build good lives after service." Marcus smiled. "Remember when you first dragged me to a meeting like this? I thought it was going to be a bunch of guys sitting around complaining. And instead you found your calling," David chuckled. "Who would have thought a master sergeant would be so good at social work?" Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several police cars in the community center parking lot. It wasn't unusual to see police in the area, as they often attended community meetings to discuss neighborhood safety issues. Marcus recognized Officer Bradley Thompson as he stepped out of the lead vehicle. Thompson was relatively new to the force, but had already developed a reputation in the neighborhood. At 38, he was a large man who seemed to enjoy the authority his badge provided. Several community members had complained about his aggressive approach to routine interactions, but no formal complaints had been filed. "Good evening, Officer Thompson," Marcus said politely as the officer approached. "Are you here for the veterans meeting? We always welcome law enforcement participation." Thompson looked Marcus up and down with obvious skepticism. "Veterans meeting? What kind of veterans?" The question struck both men as odd. David stepped forward. "All kinds. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. We're a support group for people transitioning back to civilian life." "Support group," Thompson repeated with a smirk. "Let me guess, you guys are in there talking about how hard you have it, how society owes you something." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but kept his voice level. "Actually, we focus on practical solutions. Job placement, benefit navigation, mental health resources. It's about veterans helping veterans." "Right," Thompson said, his tone becoming more dismissive. "And I suppose you two are the leaders of this little pity party?" David's hands clenched slightly, but years of military discipline kept his response measured. "We help facilitate, yes. I served 15 years in the Navy, Chief Petty Officer. Marcus here did 25 years Army, Master Sergeant." Thompson laughed, a harsh sound that carried across the parking lot. "Sure you did. Let me guess, you were both Special Forces, saved the world, deserve medals, and parades." The interaction was beginning to draw attention from other meeting attendees who had stepped outside. Marcus could see confusion and concern on their faces. Many of these veterans struggled with public interactions, and witnessing this confrontation could be triggering for those dealing with anxiety or PTSD. "Officer, I'm not sure what the issue is here," Marcus said, his military bearing becoming more pronounced. "We have proper permits for this meeting, and we're not causing any disturbances. Is there a specific problem you need to address?" Thompson stepped closer, his voice rising. "The problem is guys like you playing dress-up, pretending to be something you're not. Real veterans don't need support groups and handouts. They handle their business." David moved slightly to position himself between Thompson and the growing crowd of onlookers. His voice remained calm, but carried an edge of authority. "Officer, with respect, you don't know anything about our service records or what we've been through. Maybe we should continue this conversation privately." "Privately?" Thompson's voice was now loud enough to be heard across the parking lot. "Why? So you can spin more stories about your fake military careers. I've dealt with enough wannabes to spot them a mile away." Sarah Mitchell had emerged from the building and was quickly assessing the situation. As a social worker, she recognized the signs of an interaction spiraling out of control. Several veterans in the crowd were showing signs of stress, and she knew this could quickly become traumatic for people already dealing with service-related challenges. Marcus took a deep breath, drawing on decades of leadership experience. "Officer Thompson, I understand skepticism, but making accusations about our service without evidence is inappropriate. If you have official business here, please state it. If not, I'd appreciate it if you'd allow our meeting to continue without further disruption." The calm professionalism in Marcus's response seemed to irritate Thompson further. "Don't lecture me about appropriate, old man. I know exactly what you people are doing here, playing the victim card, expecting society to take care of you because you claim you serve your country." "Claim." David's voice carried a dangerous quiet that made several people in the crowd step back. 20 years of military training had taught him to control his temper, but Thompson was pushing boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. Thompson either didn't recognize the warning signs or chose to ignore them. "That's right, Claim. Half the guys I meet who say they're veterans are lying through their teeth. Military wannabes who think a uniform makes them special." The crowd had grown larger, and several people were now recording the interaction with their phones. Marcus noticed this and felt a mixture of concern and hope. On one hand, he didn't want their veterans group associated with a public confrontation. On the other hand, if Thompson's behavior was being documented, it might lead to accountability. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward, her professional training taking over. Officer, I'm Sarah Mitchell, a licensed social worker. These gentlemen have been running this veteran support group for 2 years. They've helped dozens of veterans access services and find employment. Perhaps we could discuss any concerns you have about the meeting through proper channels. Thompson turned his attention to Sarah, and his expression became even more dismissive. And I suppose you believe every sob story they tell you. Lady, these guys are playing you for a fool. Marcus felt something shift in the atmosphere. What had started as a confusing confrontation was becoming something uglier. Thompson wasn't just questioning their credentials. He was attacking the very foundation of their work, helping vulnerable veterans. Officer, Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led soldiers in combat, you're making serious allegations about our integrity and our service. If you have evidence to support these claims, please present it. If not, I suggest you reconsider your approach. Thompson stepped even closer, invading Marcus's personal space in a way clearly designed to intimidate. Or what, old man? You gonna call your lawyer? File a complaint? Good luck with that. David had heard enough. Officer Thompson, you're out of line. We've shown you nothing but respect, answered your questions, and tried to de-escalate this situation. Your behavior is unprofessional and, frankly, embarrassing to law enforcement. Embarrassing? Thompson's face was reddening now. You want to know what's embarrassing? 2 grown men pretending to be war heroes so they can run some charity scam. That's embarrassing. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Several veterans in the crowd audibly gasped. For men who had genuinely served their country, often at great personal cost, being accused of fraud was one of the deepest insults possible. Marcus felt 25 years of military discipline warring with human anger. Every instinct told him to respond forcefully to defend his honor and David's. But his responsibility to the vulnerable veterans watching this confrontation held him back. Officer Thompson, he said quietly, his voice carrying a steel that made several people in the crowd unconsciously straighten up. You just accused 2 honorably discharged veterans of fraud in front of their community. That's not just unprofessional, it's defamatory. Thompson apparently took the quiet response as a sign of weakness, rather than the warning it actually was. Defamatory? Try me. Prove you're real veterans. Show me your DD 214th right now. The demand for military discharge papers was both unreasonable and humiliating. Veterans weren't required to carry proof of service, and demanding to see such documents in a public setting was both inappropriate and potentially illegal. David stepped forward, his Navy training evident in his precise movements. Officer, you have no legal authority to demand our military records. Your behavior tonight will be reported to your superiors and to the Community Oversight Board. My superiors? Thompson laughed mockingly. They'll back me up when I tell them about 2 con artists running a scam in my district. What Thompson didn't know was that several people in the crowd had connections throughout the city government and veteran community. His accusations weren't just being recorded. They were being made in front of people who could and would verify them. Marcus made a decision that would change the trajectory of the entire situation. Instead of continuing to argue or defend himself, he pulled out his phone and began making a call. Who are you calling? Thompson demanded. My former commanding officer, Marcus replied calmly. He's now a colonel at the Pentagon. I think he'd be interested to hear that local law enforcement is questioning the validity of Army discharge records. Thompson's expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time. You're bluffing. Marcus put the phone on speaker as it began to ring. The crowd fell silent, understanding that they were about to witness something significant. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Marcus? This is unexpected. How are you doing? Colonel James Harrison had been Marcus's commanding officer during 2 deployments to Afghanistan. After Marcus retired, Harrison had continued his career and was now stationed at the Pentagon in a senior administrative role. The men had maintained contact over the years, sharing updates about family and career transitions. Sir, I apologize for calling so late, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the silent parking lot. I'm at our monthly veterans meeting, and we have a situation I thought you should be aware of. Thompson's face had gone noticeably pale. The casual confidence in Marcus's voice and the obvious respect being shown by whoever was on the other end of the call was not what he had expected. What kind of situation? Colonel Harrison's voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to dealing with complex problems quickly and efficiently. A local police officer is publicly accusing myself and another veteran of fabricating our military service. He's demanded to see our DD 214th and has called our veteran support group a fraud operation. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone. When Harrison spoke again, his voice had the edge that Marcus remembered from their time in combat zones. Is this officer present now? Yes, sir. Officer Thompson of the City Police Department. Put me on speaker and let me talk to him. Marcus held the phone higher so everyone could hear clearly. Officer Thompson, Colonel Harrison would like to speak with you. Thompson looked around nervously at the crowd of veterans and community members, all watching him intently. Several phones were still recording, and he was beginning to realize that his behavior was being documented from multiple angles. Officer Thompson, Colonel Harrison's voice carried clearly across the parking lot. This is Colonel James Harrison, currently stationed at the Pentagon. I understand you have questions about Master Sergeant Johnson's military service. Thompson cleared his throat, suddenly, sounding less confident. Colonel, I was just trying to verify that these individuals are legitimate veterans. We get a lot of fraud in this area. Fraud? Harrison's voice sharpened. Officer, Marcus Johnson served under my direct command for 3 years. He's a decorated Master Sergeant with 25 years of exemplary service, including multiple combat deployments. His integrity is beyond question. The weight of the colonel's words settled over the parking lot like a heavy blanket. Several veterans in the crowd stood a little straighter, recognizing the tone of an officer defending his soldiers. Thompson fumbled for words. Well, sir, I didn't know. There was no way to verify. Officer, Harrison interrupted, questioning someone's military service is serious business. These men earned their ranks and their right to be called veterans. Master Sergeant Johnson, in particular, saved lives under fire and received commendation for his leadership during some of our most difficult operations. David stepped forward, his phone already in his hand. Colonel, this is Chief Petty Officer Washington. I wonder if my former commanding officer might want to weigh in as well. Before anyone could respond, David was dialing. Within moments, he had Captain Rebecca Torres on the line. Torres was now a senior officer in Naval Personnel Command and remembered David well from their time serving together on a destroyer. David? What's going on? Captain Torres asked after David explained the situation. Captain, David said, putting his phone on speaker as well. Officer Thompson here has accused Chief Washington and myself of fabricating our military service records. He seems to believe we're running some kind of fraud operation. Torres's voice, when it came through the speaker, carried the no-nonsense tone of a seasoned naval officer. Officer Thompson, Chief Washington served with distinction for 15 years. He was one of the finest electronic specialists I ever worked with, and his service record is impeccable. Thompson was now visibly sweating despite the cool evening air. What had started as routine harassment of 2 men he assumed were easy targets had spiraled into a confrontation with high-ranking military officers who could verify every detail of their service. Marcus ended his call with Colonel Harrison after exchanging promises to stay in touch. David wrapped up his conversation with Captain Torres. Both men looked at Thompson with expressions that were somehow more intimidating than anger. They looked disappointed. Officer Thompson, Marcus said quietly, those were our former commanding officers. Both are currently serving in senior positions in the military. Would you like us to call anyone else to verify our service? Thompson looked around at the crowd, many of whom were now openly hostile to his presence. The veterans in the group had gone from confusion to anger as they realized that Thompson's accusations weren't just directed at Marcus and David, but represented a broader disrespect for their service and sacrifice. I was just doing my job, Thompson stammered, checking on reports of suspicious activity. What reports? Sarah Mitchell stepped forward, her professional demeanor intact but clearly angry. This meeting was properly scheduled. We have all required permits, and these gentlemen have been running this program successfully for 2 years. What suspicious activity are you referring to? Thompson couldn't provide an answer because there hadn't been any reports. His confrontation with Marcus and David had been entirely based on his own assumptions and prejudices. A new voice cut through the tension. Officer Thompson, what exactly is going on here? Everyone turned to see Lieutenant Patricia Rodriguez approaching from across the parking lot. Rodriguez was Thompson's immediate supervisor and had received a call about a disturbance involving one of her officers. She was a 15-year veteran of the force known for her professionalism and fair approach to community policing. Thompson's face flushed red as he realized his supervisor had arrived in the middle of his confrontation. Lieutenant, I was investigating reports of suspicious activity at this meeting. Rodriguez looked around at the diverse crowd of veterans and community members, many clearly upset by what they had witnessed. She had worked this neighborhood for years and was familiar with the veteran support group. Her own brother was a Marine veteran who struggled with PTSD, and she understood the importance of programs like this. What reports, Thompson? I didn't assign you to investigate anything here tonight. The question hung in the air, and Thompson's inability to answer it told everyone present exactly what they needed to know about the legitimacy of his actions. Marcus decided to take control of the situation before it deteriorated further. Lieutenant Rodriguez, I'm Marcus Johnson, one of the facilitators of this veteran support group. Officer Thompson has been questioning our military service and accusing us of fraud. He demanded to see our discharge papers and called our program a scam. Rodriguez's expression hardened as she processed this information. False accusations against veterans were taken seriously by the department, and Thompson's behavior was clearly outside policy guidelines for community interactions. Officer Thompson, Rodriguez said in a voice that brooked no argument, return to your patrol car immediately. We'll discuss this at the station. As Thompson began to walk away, David called out to him, Officer, before you go, I think you owe these people an apology. Your accusations weren't just wrong. They were hurtful to veterans who've already sacrificed enough. Thompson stopped walking, but didn't turn around. The weight of dozens of eyes on him was almost physical. He had publicly humiliated himself and disrespected people who deserved better treatment. Lieutenant Rodriguez understood the gravity of the situation. Thompson turned around and faced these people. Reluctantly, Thompson turned to face the crowd. His earlier arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by obvious discomfort and embarrassment. He began, then stopped. I apologize for questioning your service. I was out of line. The apology was grudging and clearly forced, but it was something. Several veterans in the crowd nodded acknowledgement, though their expressions remained stern. Marcus stepped forward, demonstrating the leadership that had made him successful in the military and in civilian life. Officer Thompson, apology accepted. But I hope you'll think about what happened here tonight. These veterans came here looking for support and community, not confrontation. Lieutenant Rodriguez made notes in a small pad she had pulled from her pocket. Mr. Johnson, would you and Mr. Washington be willing to come to the station tomorrow to provide statements about tonight's incident? Of course, David replied. We want to make sure this doesn't happen to other veterans in the future. After the police cars departed, the veteran support group reconvened inside the community center. But the energy of the evening had changed dramatically. What should have been a routine meeting about housing assistance and job fairs had become something much more significant. Sarah Mitchell addressed the group first. I know tonight's events were disturbing for many of you. If anyone needs to talk about what happened, please don't hesitate to reach out. Several newer members looked shaken by the confrontation. For veterans already dealing with anxiety, PTSD, or trust issues, witnessing respected community leaders being publicly humiliated could be deeply triggering. Marcus stood before the group, his military bearing evident, but his voice gentle. What happened tonight was wrong, but it also showed us something important. This community has our backs. You saw people stand up, record what happened, and refuse to let disrespect go unchallenged. An older veteran in the back raised his hand. Marcus, how many times has stuff like this happened to you guys? It was a question that cut to the heart of a painful reality. Both Marcus and David had faced skepticism and disrespect in various forms since leaving the military, but tonight's confrontation was particularly public and humiliating. David answered honestly. More than it should, but less than it used to. Things are getting better, but we still have work to do to educate people about veterans' issues and contributions. A young woman who had recently returned from deployment spoke up. I've been worried about stuff like this. People looking at me and not believing I serve because I don't fit their idea of what a veteran looks like. Her comment opened a floodgate of similar experiences from group members. Veterans shared stories of being questioned, dismissed, or treated with suspicion in various settings. The common thread was that people's preconceptions about military service often didn't match the reality of modern veterans. Marcus listened to each story with the attention and respect he would have given to mission briefings during his military career. When the last person had spoken, he addressed the group with the wisdom gained from decades of leadership experience. Every one of you earned your place in this room through your service and sacrifice. Don't let anyone make you question that or feel ashamed of asking for help when you need it. What happened tonight was about one person's ignorance, not about your worth or validity as veterans. The meeting ran longer than usual as people processed the evening's events. When it finally ended, many members lingered in small groups, continuing conversations and offering support to those who seemed most affected by the confrontation. As Marcus and David cleaned up the meeting space, Sarah Mitchell approached them. That was remarkable leadership under pressure tonight. You both handled that situation better than most people could have. Marcus stacked the last of the folding chairs. We learned a long time ago that losing your temper rarely solves problems. But I'll admit, it was difficult. The fact that you had those contacts ready made all the difference, David added. Thompson clearly expected us to back down or be unable to prove our service. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I think tonight's events are going to have consequences beyond just Officer Thompson's behavior. The video footage people took is already spreading on social media. Indeed, by the time Marcus and David reached their cars, both of their phones were buzzing with notifications. The videos of their confrontation with Thompson were being shared across multiple platforms, along with the audio of their conversations with Colonel Harrison and Captain Torres. The story was spreading beyond the local community, resonating with veterans and supporters across the country who had witnessed or experienced similar disrespect. Comments were pouring in from active duty service members, veterans, and civilians expressing outrage at Thompson's behavior and admiration for how Marcus and David had handled the situation. But the most significant developments were yet to come. By morning, the video of Officer Thompson's confrontation with Marcus and David had been viewed over 2 million times across various social media platforms. Local news stations were calling both veterans for interviews, and the police department was fielding calls from reporters, veterans organizations, and concerned citizens. Marcus woke to find his phone buzzing with messages from former military colleagues, family members, and complete strangers who had seen video. The messages ranged from expressions of support to offers to help in any way possible. Several high-ranking military officials had reached out, expressing their dismay at Thompson's behavior and their support for the veteran support group. David's experience was similar. His phone had been ringing since 6 in the morning with calls from local television news, national veterans advocacy groups, and former shipmates who wanted to express their outrage at the treatment he and Marcus had received. The two men met for breakfast at a diner near the police station where they were scheduled to give their statements later that morning. The conversation at nearby tables often stopped when other diners recognized them from the viral video footage. I never expected it to blow up like this, David said, stirring sugar in his coffee while glancing at his still buzzing phone. My daughter called me from college crying. She was so angry about what happened. Marcus nodded, understanding the mixed emotions David was experiencing. My son wants to fly in from Denver to have a conversation with Officer Thompson. I had to talk him out of it. The server, An older woman with kind eyes approached their table with obvious recognition. "Are you the veterans from that video? The one with the police officer?" Both men tensed slightly, unsure whether the recognition would lead to support or additional confrontation. But the woman's expression was one of sympathy and respect. "I just wanted you to know that my late husband was a Vietnam veteran, and what that officer did to you is disgraceful. Your coffee's on the house this morning." Similar interactions followed them throughout the morning. Store clerks, fellow customers, and strangers on the street recognized them and offered words of support. The video had clearly struck a nerve with people who understood the sacrifices veterans had made and were outraged by Thompson's disrespectful treatment. At 9 o'clock, Marcus and David arrived at the police station to give their statements. They were met by Detective Angela Martinez, a respected investigator who specialized in cases involving officer conduct. Martinez had reviewed the video footage and witness statements from the previous evening. "Gentlemen," Detective Martinez began as they settled into a conference room, "I want you to know that this investigation is being taken very seriously. Officer Thompson's behavior was clearly outside department policy and professional standards. The statement-taking process was thorough but professional." Martinez asked detailed questions about the timeline of events, their attempts to de-escalate the situation, and the impact of Thompson's accusations on them personally and on the veterans group they facilitated. "Has Officer Thompson ever had interactions with your group before?" Martinez asked, making notes in a thick file folder. "Not directly," Marcus replied. "We've seen him around the neighborhood, but this was the first time he specifically approached us or questioned our activities." "What about reports of suspicious activity?" Thompson claimed he was responding to complaints about your meeting. David shook his head firmly. "There weren't any complaints. We have all the proper permits. We've been meeting in the same location for 2 years, and we maintained good relationships with our neighbors and the community center staff." Martinez nodded, confirming what she had already discovered through her investigation. "We've checked all dispatch records and community complaint logs. There were no reports of suspicious activity related to your meeting or your organization." The implications of this information were significant. It meant that Thompson's confrontation with the veterans was entirely unprovoked and based on his own biases rather than any legitimate police business. As they concluded their statements, Martinez shared some additional information. "I want you both to know that this investigation has the full attention of department leadership. Chief Williams has personally reviewed the case file and the video footage. Chief Williams was a respected law enforcement professional who had worked hard to improve police-community relations during his tenure. The fact that he was personally involved indicated the seriousness with which the department was treating the incident. After leaving the police station, Marcus and David decided to check on the community center where their meeting had taken place. They wanted to ensure that the previous evening's confrontation hadn't damaged their relationship with the facility management or made them unwelcome. Community Center Director Janet Morrison greeted them with warm hugs and immediate reassurance. "We've been fielding calls all morning from people who want to support your group. 3 local businesses have offered to sponsor refreshments for your meetings, and the mayor's office called to discuss expanding your program." The unexpected outpouring of support was overwhelming. What Thompson had intended as an attack on their credibility had instead highlighted the value of their work and generated unprecedented community support. "There's something else," Morrison continued, leading them to her office. "We've had over 50 new veterans contact us since the video went viral. They want to join your support group or start similar programs in their neighborhoods." This development represented both an opportunity and a challenge. Marcus and David had carefully built their group's intimate, supportive atmosphere over 2 years. Suddenly, scaling to accommodate massive new interest would require careful planning and additional resources. David pulled out his phone to show Marcus the latest developments on social media. "Look at this," he said, scrolling through comments and shares. Veterans from all over the country are sharing their own stories about being questioned or disrespected. It's like we opened a floodgate. Indeed, the hashtag Veterans Deserve Respect was trending nationally, with thousands of posts sharing experiences similar to what Marcus and David had endured. Current and former military members were posting photos of their service, sharing stories of discrimination, and expressing solidarity with the two men who had stood their ground against Thompson's accusations. More significantly, several congressional representatives had issued statements condemning Thompson's behavior and calling for better training for law enforcement officers on veterans' issues. The incident was evolving from a local confrontation into a national conversation about how society treats its veterans. That afternoon, Marcus received a call that would change the trajectory of the entire situation even further. The caller identified himself as James Crawford, Executive Director of the National Veterans Support Foundation, one of the largest veterans advocacy organizations in the country. Mr. Johnson, Crawford said, "I've been following the situation with Officer Thompson, and I wanted to reach out personally. What happened to you and Mr. Washington represents a larger problem that we've been working to address nationwide." Crawford explained that his organization had been documenting cases of veterans being questioned, discriminated against, or disrespected in various settings. The video of Thompson's behavior had provided a clear, undeniable example of the problem that could be used to advocate for better policies and training. We'd like to invite you and Mr. Washington to participate in a national campaign about veterans' dignity and respect. Your response to that officer showed exactly the kind of leadership and composure that can help change attitudes. The offer was tempting, but also daunting. Both men had simply been trying to facilitate a local support group for fellow veterans. They hadn't intended to become national advocates or public figures. Marcus discussed the invitation with David over lunch, weighing the potential benefits against the personal costs of increased public attention. "We could help a lot more veterans if we work with Crawford's organization," he mused. "But we also risk losing the personal connection that makes our local group effective," David countered. "There's something to be said for staying focused on what we do best." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had requested to meet with them privately. She looked tired and stressed as she joined them at their table. "Gentlemen, I wanted to update you on the investigation and apologize personally for Officer Thompson's behavior. What he did was wrong, and it doesn't represent the values of our department." Rodriguez explained that Thompson was being placed on administrative leave pending the completion of a formal investigation. Additionally, the department was reviewing his previous interactions with community members to determine if there was a pattern of inappropriate behavior. "We've also discovered that Officer Thompson had received cultural sensitivity training and specific training on veterans' issues just 6 months ago. His behavior last night was inexcusable regardless of his training, but it's particularly troubling given his recent education on these topics." The revelation that Thompson had been recently trained on veterans' issues made his behavior even more egregious. It suggested that his confrontation with Marcus and David wasn't based on ignorance, but on deliberate disrespect. "What happens next?" David asked. "The investigation will be completed within 2 weeks," Rodriguez replied. "Depending on the findings, Officer Thompson could face anything from additional training and counseling to suspension or termination." As Rodriguez departed, both men reflected on how quickly their quiet Wednesday evening had transformed into a community and national issue. The simple act of standing up for themselves and their fellow veterans had unleashed consequences far beyond what they could have anticipated. That evening, as they prepared for what they expected to be a much larger than usual veterans meeting, Marcus received another call that would add yet another dimension to the unfolding story. "Master Sergeant Johnson, this is Captain Patricia Chun from the Army Public Affairs Office. I'm calling about the incident with Officer Thompson." Marcus listened as Captain Chun explained that the Army had become aware of the situation through social media and the involvement of Colonel Harrison. The service was considering making a formal statement supporting Marcus and David while also highlighting the broader issues faced by veterans and civilian communities. "Sir, we'd like to feature you and Chief Washington in an upcoming campaign about veteran transition services. Your example of maintaining dignity under pressure while advocating for fellow veterans aligns perfectly with our values. The offer represented official recognition from the military itself, validating not just their service records, but their ongoing contributions to the veteran community. It was an honor neither man had expected when they started their modest support group. As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized that Officer Thompson's attempt to humiliate them had instead created a platform to help veterans nationwide. The confrontation that was meant to diminish them had amplified their voices and their mission in ways they never could have imagined. The question now was how to use this unexpected opportunity responsibly while staying true to their original goal of helping veterans build successful civilian lives. The veterans meeting that Thursday evening was unlike anything Marcus and David had experienced in their 2 years of facilitating the group. The community center parking lot was full by 6 o'clock, an hour before the scheduled start time, and cars were lined up along the street for 3 blocks in each direction. Janet Morrison, the community center director, had worked with local police to manage the crowd and ensure safety. Lieutenant Rodriguez herself was present in uniform, demonstrating the department's commitment to protecting the meeting and showing respect for the veterans in attendance. Inside the main hall, the usual circle of 40 chairs had been expanded to accommodate over 200 people. Veterans had driven from neighboring cities, some traveling hundreds of miles after seeing the viral video and wanting to show support. Local news crews were present, though they had agreed to remain outside during the actual meeting to preserve the group's privacy and therapeutic atmosphere. Marcus stood before the assembled crowd, feeling both humbled and overwhelmed by the response. Among the familiar faces of regular members, he saw veterans of all ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds. Some wore pieces of military uniforms or unit insignia, while others dressed in civilian clothes, but carried themselves with unmistakable military bearing. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Marcus began, his voice carrying easily through the packed hall. "When David and I started this group, we never imagined it would grow like this, especially under these circumstances." The crowd listened with respectful silence as Marcus recounted the events of the previous evening, though most were already familiar with the story from news coverage and social media. Several people nodded grimly as he described Thompson's accusations and disrespectful behavior. "What happened with Officer Thompson was wrong," Marcus continued, "but it's also shown us something important about our community and our country. The support we've received over the past day has been extraordinary." David stepped forward to address the crowd next. "We've heard from veterans all over the country who've had similar experiences. Being questioned about our service, having our integrity challenged, being treated with suspicion instead of respect. That ends now." The crowd erupted in applause, a sound that could be heard clearly outside where news crews and additional supporters had gathered. The energy in the room was electric, charged with years of frustration and a newfound sense of empowerment. Sarah Mitchell, the social worker who had witnessed the confrontation, addressed the group about the psychological impact of disrespect on veteran communities. "When someone questions your service, they're attacking your identity at its core. For many veterans, military service represents the most meaningful period of their lives, a time when they serve something larger than themselves." An older Vietnam veteran in the front row raised his hand. "I came home in 1971 to people spitting on me and calling me a baby killer. I thought we'd move past that kind of treatment." His comment opened a discussion about the different ways veterans have been treated across different eras and conflicts. Vietnam veterans shared stories of hostility and disrespect that lasted for decades after their service. Gulf War veterans talked about being questioned about the legitimacy of their short war. Post 9/11 veterans described being either ignored or treated with pity rather than respect. A young woman in military fatigues spoke up from the back of the room. "I'm still active duty, but I wanted to be here tonight. What Officer Thompson did to you could happen to any of us when we get out. You showed us how to respond with dignity." Her comment highlighted an important aspect of the incident that was often overlooked. Active duty service members were watching to see how veterans were treated in civilian communities, and their observations would influence their own transition planning and expectations. Marcus decided to share something he had been hesitant to discuss publicly. After I retired from the Army, I applied for dozens of jobs. In interview after interview, employers seemed skeptical about whether my military experience was relevant to civilian work. Some acted like my 25 years of leadership and problem-solving experience was actually a negative. The admission resonated throughout the room. Many veterans nodded in recognition, having faced similar challenges in translating their military skills to civilian employment. The disconnect between military service and civilian appreciation was a common source of frustration and alienation. David shared his own experience. I was told in one job interview that I was probably too rigid for their company culture because of my military background. The person interviewing me had never served but felt qualified to make assumptions about who I was based on stereotypes. These personal revelations from their leaders encouraged other group members to share similar stories. A former Marine talked about being passed over for promotions because colleagues assumed he would be too aggressive. A former Air Force technician described being excluded from team activities because coworkers thought she would be too serious. The stories painted a picture of a civilian society that often claimed to support veterans while simultaneously maintaining stereotypes and biases that created barriers to successful reintegration. Officer Thompson's behavior was extreme, but it reflected broader attitudes that many veterans encountered in less dramatic but equally harmful ways. As the formal meeting progressed, several attendees shared updates on the aftermath of the Thompson incident. A local businessman announced that his company was creating a fast-track hiring program specifically for veterans. A college administrator revealed that the viral video had prompted her institution to review their veteran support services and expand their programs. Most significantly, Mayor Susan Rodriguez, no relation to Lieutenant Rodriguez, made an unannounced appearance to address the group personally. As a Navy veteran herself, she understood the importance of the issues being discussed. What happened Monday night was unacceptable, the mayor declared to enthusiastic applause. I've directed the city attorney to review our police training protocols and ensure that all officers receive comprehensive education about veteran issues and cultural competency. The mayor also announced the creation of a new city position, Veterans Liaison Coordinator. The role would be responsible for ensuring that city services and employees understood and respected veteran needs and contributions. She asked Marcus and David if they would consider serving on the selection committee for the position. During the break, Marcus was approached by Representative Michael Thompson, no relation to Officer Thompson, who had driven 2 hours to attend the meeting. As a member of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, he wanted to understand the broader implications of the incident. Master Sergeant, Representative Thompson said, "Your situation has reached my office through multiple channels. We're considering federal legislation that would require law enforcement agencies receiving federal funding to include comprehensive veteran awareness training." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a group that surprised everyone in attendance. 15 police officers from neighboring jurisdictions had come to show support for the veterans and to distance themselves from their colleagues' behavior. Sergeant Maria Santos from the County Sheriff's Department stepped forward to address the group. "We wanted to be here tonight to show that Officer Thompson's behavior doesn't represent law enforcement values. Many of us are veterans ourselves, and we're ashamed of how you were treated." The presence of the supportive officers created a powerful moment of reconciliation and understanding. Several veterans approached them during the break to share their own experiences and to thank them for their service and their gesture of respect. As the evening continued, it became clear that the incident with Thompson had catalyzed something much larger than a local support group. National veterans organizations were coordinating responses, elected officials were drafting legislation, and communities across the country were examining their own treatment of veteran populations. Marcus received a text message from Colonel Harrison at the Pentagon. "Watch the news coverage of tonight's meeting. Proud of how you're handling this situation. You're representing the Army well. Similar messages were arriving from former colleagues, friends, and family members who were following the story's development. The support was gratifying, but it also added pressure to handle the situation responsibly. During the final portion of the meeting, a conversation developed about how to channel the energy and attention into lasting positive change. Simply basking in support wouldn't address the underlying issues that had led to Thompson's behavior or the similar experiences shared by veterans throughout the evening. David proposed the creation of a regional coalition of veterans groups that could advocate for policy changes, provide support for veterans facing discrimination, and educate communities about veteran issues. The proposal was met with enthusiastic support and immediate offers to help organize and fund such an effort. A former Army lawyer in attendance volunteered to research the legal options available to veterans who face discrimination or harassment. A retired Air Force officer with corporate human resources experience offered to develop training programs for employers about veteran hiring and workplace integration. As the meeting concluded at nearly 10 o'clock, 3 hours after its scheduled end time, the energy in the room remained high. People exchanged contact information, made plans for follow-up meetings, and committed to specific actions that would extend the impact of the evening beyond the community center walls. Marcus and David stayed until the last attendees had left, helping to clean up and process the evening's events. The transformation from a routine support group meeting to a rallying point for regional veteran advocacy was both exhilarating and daunting. "We've got to be careful not to lose sight of our original mission," David cautioned as they stacked the last of the chairs. "All this attention is great, but the individual veterans who need support and guidance are still our primary responsibility." Marcus nodded in agreement. "The question is whether we can scale our impact without losing the personal connection that makes this work effective." As they prepared to leave, Janet Morrison approached with a stack of papers. "These are applications from other community centers wanting to host similar programs. Word is spreading faster than we can keep up with." The papers represented both an opportunity and a responsibility. Marcus and David had created something that clearly resonated with veteran communities across a much wider area than they had initially envisioned. But expanding would require careful planning, additional resources, and a commitment to maintaining the quality and integrity of their approach. Walking to their cars under a sky full of stars, both men reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed in just 3 days. What had begun as a confrontation with a disrespectful police officer had evolved into a platform for addressing systemic issues affecting veterans nationwide. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities as the story continued to develop, and their role in the broader veteran advocacy community continued to evolve. 3 weeks after the confrontation with Officer Thompson, Marcus and David found themselves sitting in a conference room at City Hall, facing a very different kind of meeting. The formal investigation into Thompson's conduct had concluded, and Chief Williams had requested their presence for the announcement of his decision. The investigation had been thorough and damning. Detective Martinez had interviewed dozens of witnesses, reviewed all available video footage, and examined Thompson's previous interactions with community members. The pattern that emerged painted a picture of an officer who had repeatedly overstepped his authority and shown bias in his treatment of minorities and veterans. Chief Williams, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with his own military background, addressed the room with grave seriousness. Present were Marcus, David, Lieutenant Rodriguez, Detective Martinez, the mayor, and several reporters who had been following the story. After a comprehensive investigation, Chief Williams began, "I have determined that Officer Bradley Thompson violated multiple department policies in his interaction with Master Sergeant Johnson and Chief Petty Officer Washington. His conduct was unprofessional, discriminatory, and contrary to the values this department upholds." The chief paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle before continuing. "Effective immediately, Officer Thompson is being terminated from the police department. Additionally, this case will be forwarded to the state attorney's office for potential criminal charges related to civil rights violations." The termination was more severe than many had expected, but the investigation had revealed that Thompson's behavior extended far beyond the single incident with Marcus and David. Multiple community members had come forward with similar stories of harassment and discrimination, painting a picture of systematic misconduct. Furthermore, Chief Williams continued, "This incident has highlighted gaps in our training and community engagement protocols. Effective next month, all officers will undergo enhanced cultural competency training with specific modules on veteran issues, developed in consultation with local veterans organizations." Marcus felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness at the announcement. While Thompson's termination provided accountability, it also represented the end of a career and the failure of systems that should have prevented the situation from occurring in the first place. Mayor Rodriguez took the podium next. "This incident has been a wake-up call for our entire city government. We've launched a comprehensive review of all city services to ensure they meet the needs and demonstrate the respect our veterans deserve." The mayor announced several concrete changes resulting from the Thompson incident. The Veterans Liaison Coordinator position had been filled by Amanda Foster, a former Army officer with extensive experience in veteran services. Foster would work directly with Marcus and David to expand support services citywide. Additionally, the city had partnered with local businesses to create a veteran-friendly certification program. Businesses completing cultural competency training and demonstrating measurable support for veteran employees and customers would receive recognition and promotional support from the city. After the formal announcements concluded, Marcus and David spoke privately with Chief Williams. Despite the positive outcomes, both men wanted to understand how the situation could have been prevented and what lessons could be learned for the future. "Chief," David asked, "how did Officer Thompson pass the background checks and training if he had these biases?" Williams sighed, clearly troubled by the question. "That's something we're examining closely. He interviewed well, had clean references, and completed all required training. Sometimes people hide their true attitudes until they feel secure in their positions." The chief explained that the department was implementing new assessment tools designed to better identify candidates with bias or authority issues. They were also extending probationary periods and increasing supervision for new officers. "Your response to this situation has been exemplary," Williams told them. "You maintained your dignity, de-escalated when possible, and used your contacts professionally to establish credibility. You've shown us how citizens should respond when faced with inappropriate police behavior." Later that day, Marcus and David attended a very different kind of meeting at the national headquarters of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. The VFW had invited them to address their National Executive Committee about the broader implications of their experience and the response it had generated. The room was filled with veteran leaders from across the country, representing millions of former service members. Commander Patricia Walsh, a retired Marine colonel, introduced them with obvious pride. "Gentlemen," Commander Walsh began, "your response to Officer Thompson has resonated throughout the veteran community. You've shown that we don't have to accept disrespect or discrimination, and that standing up for ourselves can create positive change for all veterans." Marcus addressed the assembled leaders, sharing lessons learned from their experience and the rapid expansion of their local support group model. "The most important thing we've learned is that individual veterans' experiences reflect larger systemic issues. When we help one veteran, we're often uncovering problems that affect thousands." David discussed the practical aspects of scaling their support group model to serve larger populations while maintaining the personal connection that made it effective. "We've had to be very intentional about training new facilitators and establishing quality standards. Growth without quality is just expansion, not improvement." The VFW leadership was particularly interested in the community response and the way local businesses and organizations had rallied around the veterans' cause. Several commanders shared similar stories from their own communities, suggesting that Marcus and David's experience was part of a larger trend of improving civilian-veteran relations. Commander Walsh concluded the session by announcing that the VFW would be adopting and promoting the support group model developed by Marcus and David. They would provide training, resources, and funding to help establish similar programs in communities nationwide. That evening, Marcus and David were guests on a national news program, their first television interview since the incident began. The host, a respected journalist known for thoughtful coverage of military issues, asked them to reflect on how their lives had changed in just 3 weeks. "We never intended to become public figures or advocates," Marcus explained. "We were just two veterans trying to help our neighbors transition successfully to civilian life. But Officer Thompson's behavior forced us to stand up not just for ourselves, but for all veterans who've faced similar disrespect." David added, "The response has been overwhelming, but it's also shown us how many veterans are hungry for community and support. The isolation many veterans feel isn't just individual. It's a symptom of how disconnected military and civilian communities have become." The interview touched on the broader themes that had emerged from their experience: the need for better veteran transition support, the importance of community understanding of military culture, and the responsibility of veterans to advocate for themselves and their peers. When asked about Officer Thompson specifically, both men expressed hope that he would learn from the experience and find a career path better suited to his temperament. "We don't want to see anyone's life destroyed," Marcus said, "but there have to be consequences for behavior that harms the people police officers are sworn to protect and serve." The interview concluded with both men discussing their future plans. The success of their support group model had attracted national attention and resources, but they remained committed to their local community and the personal relationships they had built with individual veterans. 6 months later, Marcus and David stood before a crowd of over 500 people at the first annual National Veterans Dignity Conference. The event, held in a convention center in their city, had attracted veteran advocates, mental health professionals, policymakers, and community leaders from across the country. The conference featured workshops on veteran transition support, employer education, community outreach, and legislative advocacy. Marcus and David served as keynote speakers, sharing their story and the lessons learned from the aftermath of the Thompson incident. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Marcus told the assembled crowd, "but it does happen when good people decide they won't accept the status quo. Every veteran in this room has the power to improve conditions for those who come after us." David presented data on the growth of their support group model. In 6 months, similar programs had been established in over 200 communities across 43 states. Early results showed measurable improvements in veteran employment rates, mental health outcomes, and community integration in areas with active programs. The conference also featured a panel discussion with law enforcement leaders who had implemented comprehensive veteran awareness training in their departments. Several chiefs reported improved police-community relations and fewer incidents involving veterans after implementing the new protocols. Perhaps most significantly, the conference announced the formation of the National Veterans Dignity Coalition, a permanent organization dedicated to combating discrimination against veterans and promoting policies that support successful civilian integration. Marcus and David accepted positions on the coalition's executive board while maintaining their commitment to local programming. Amanda Foster, the city's Veterans Liaison Coordinator, presented a case study of the policy changes implemented in their city following the Thompson incident. Other municipalities were adopting similar approaches, creating a network of veteran-friendly communities with standardized support services and cultural competency requirements. As the conference concluded, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. A single evening's confrontation with a biased police officer had evolved into a national movement for veteran dignity and respect. The transformation had been both rewarding and challenging, requiring them to balance local responsibilities with national opportunities. Officer Thompson himself had become something of a cautionary tale in law enforcement circles. After his termination, he had struggled to find employment in policing and eventually moved to another state. He had never publicly acknowledged the harm his behavior had caused or expressed genuine remorse for his actions. But the legacy of that confrontation extended far beyond Thompson's personal consequences. Thousands of veterans had found support through the expanded network of community programs. Police departments had improved their cultural competency training. Employers had developed better appreciation for veteran skills and contributions. Most importantly, veterans themselves had gained a stronger voice in advocating for their needs and dignity. The viral video of Marcus and David standing their ground against disrespect had inspired countless others to speak up about their own experiences and demand better treatment. In his closing remarks at the conference, Marcus returned to the core message that had guided their work from the beginning. Every veteran deserves respect, support, and the opportunity to build a successful civilian life. When we stand together and demand nothing less than dignity, we honor not just ourselves, but everyone who served before us and everyone who will serve in the future. The standing ovation that followed lasted several minutes, a testament to how far the veteran community had come in finding its voice and asserting its value. What had begun as a confrontation in a community center parking lot had become a movement for lasting change, proving that sometimes the most powerful responses to injustice are those rooted in dignity, community, and unwavering commitment to doing what's right. Years later, when people asked Marcus and David about that evening with Officer Thompson, they would always emphasize that the real heroes were the veterans who chose to seek help, the community members who offered support, and the countless individuals who decided to be part of the solution rather than passive observers of the problem. Their story was ultimately not about confronting one bad officer, but about the power of people coming together to create the kind of community they wanted to live in.